The current image of Vlad the Impaler is dominated by killings. Vlad is not remembered as a church builder like Stephen the Great, a wise elder, creator of greater Wallachia like Mircea the Elder, or a country unifier like Michael the Brave. Depending on the culture we lived in, some see these killings as legitimate and call them punishments or natural results of wars. I'm referring here to Romanians. The international public, used to the hyper-commercialized Gothic culture of bloody dark orgies, calls them brutalities. We are not discussing here who is right, but the foundations of this image. Was therefore Vlad the Impaler the deadliest and most dangerous ruler in the history of Romanians? Is there any substantial evidence for his alleged genocidal systematic policies? And in the end, who did he kill more of? Whether they are Muslims or Christians, brave soldiers or innocent civilians. In this episode, we present to you all the figures reported in the most important contemporary sources, which we then contrast with realistic figures resulting from the reconstruction of his battles and with those of other Romanian warrior voivodes. Greetings, my name is Adrian Gheorghe. I'm a doctor of history, and along with Albert Weber, whom you see less often, I am part of the international research team Corpus Draculianum. The information we present here is the result of our extensive research on original historical sources, consulted across countless archives, libraries, and museums. Before we get started, I want to draw your attention to the fact that YouTube's new algorithm no longer takes only your subscriptions into account. If you want to receive a notification every time we upload a brand new video, it is absolutely essential to also activate the bell icon. We truly appreciate everything you do to support this channel. Vlad the Impaler was an extraordinarily formidable voivode for Wallachia's adversaries for two simple reasons. His military strikes were particularly devastatingly effective, and despite many attempts either to kill him or to depose him, the Impaler survived for a significant number of years, managing to mobilize new troops every single year, capable of relentlessly wearing down the soldiers, but also the properties and inhabitants of the adversaries' domains. This was a truly remarkable performance for contemporaries, with practically everyone expecting Wallachia to be occupied by the Ottomans, as had happened in the case of Bulgaria, Serbia, and Byzantium. Is it really any wonder then that the adversaries, unable to defeat him in battle, launched an extensive propaganda campaign to his suzerains in Buda and Istanbul? They denigrated him as a ruthless tyrant, but also weak and perverse, suggesting that he showed an unnatural craving for human blood. In this context, we can only expect a competition of exaggerations among our available historical source materials. But let's consider the sources one by one, the most important ones, taking into account only concrete figures, explicitly stated by contemporary authors. Since no clear distinction was made between civilians and the military in the Middle Ages, the victims are mixed together by the authors. The sources suggest that almost all of them were peasants or merchants, meaning civilians, as we would call them today. The lowest figure is the one put forward by the German chronicler Leonardus Heft, who reports that the voivode had 18,000 Christians impaled. According to the Byzantine chronicler Leonikos Chalkokondyles, the figure is higher. He explicitly claims that Vlad brutally executed 20,000 of his Christian enemies in Wallachia to secure his power, subsequently distributing their goods among his loyal supporters. As for the specific number of Ottomans killed, the chronicler remains entirely silent, but he goes on to claim that the famous night attack left behind only a small number of Ottoman victims. The same figure of 20,000 victims is also reported by the Chronicle of the Ottoman Oruk, who very likely had access to reports circulating at the Sultan's court. Vlad himself only ever speaks once about the number of victims, namely in his famous personal letter of February 11, 1462, sent to his Hungarian liege, Matthias Corvinus. In this document, the voivode claims that his soldiers counted exactly 23,889 victims of his combined attacks on the Ottoman bank of the Danube River. Besides, and I quote his words, those who unfortunately burned in their own houses. Of course, Tepes had every interest in inflating these figures, thus highlighting his military success. These figures were then transmitted through various channels all over Europe and rounded off, either to 24,000 as with Blasius of Bardejov, or to 30,000 as with Francesco Gonzaga or William Way. These are, however, quite modest figures. You haven't seen everything yet. Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, communicated to Niccolò Modrusa, the papal legate who came to his court in Buda, in the very presence of Vlad, then a prisoner, that the voivode had killed over 40,000 Wallachians from the pro-Ottoman party, practically doubling the figure put forward by Chaco condiles. The famous German stories doubled this number again, not finding it sensational enough, but they provide a detailed account. What figures are we talking about? According to the Coma manuscript version of this story, compiled in 1466, Vlad supposedly killed 300 gypsies, 400 poor Wallachians, 500 Wallachian boyars, 1,000 Transylvanian Saxons, including 400 boys and 600 merchants, 30,000 Romanians in Amlash, 25,000 Bulgarians, 25 people in Nicopolis, also located in Bulgaria, but the author didn't know that. The total sum would therefore reach 82,200 victims. Does it seem exaggerated? Well, you haven't seen everything yet. The champion of exaggerations is the German chronicler Gebhard Dascher, until a few years ago unknown to Romanian researchers. Dascher gives the following figures: 200 euthanized poor, 300 gypsies, 500 boyars, 500 Ottoman envoys, 1,000 Saxons, 5,000 Ottoman soldiers, 30,000 Romanians in Amlash, 5,000 Bulgarians, 25,000 Ottomans, and 92,268 people killed, quote, in another country, as it says in the book, probably referring to a lost version of the letter from Tepes mentioned earlier. The total sum is 179,768 victims. Since the author reports on many other massacres and killings, we can see that we have a source that, in all seriousness, claims that Tepes killed over 180,000 people, which is almost half of Wallachia's population at that time. If we are to accept the premise that the Wallachian army could have had a maximum of 10,000 men, then it logically follows that, on average, each of them would have impaled or decapitated a minimum of 18 different individuals. You can present these figures to anyone who claims that chroniclers supposedly don't lie. The truth is that medieval chroniclers deserve about the same trust as modern journalists. The information they provide must always be treated with caution and a critical spirit. It is fundamentally incorrect to idealize chronicles just because they are ancient or historical, as people had the same tendencies and behaviors then as they do now. Some are honest, while others only serve to promote political or commercial interests. In order to accurately estimate exactly how many people Tepes killed in the 3-decade period from his first to his last reign, we must carefully examine and determine which military actions he undertook and how many deaths they could potentially have resulted in. Since it would take forever to list the long list of these actions, I'm inserting the full list below in the description of this episode, and I invite you, of course, to discuss and dissect it. Keep in mind, however, as we discussed in the episode dedicated to Ottoman forces, that the complex structures of medieval armies were much smaller than those from the Romantic or modern periods. The troops participating in raids numbered only a few, not many hundreds of horsemen. Even in the operations to take the throne, most likely thousands of people were not involved. For example, we don't believe that the claimant Dan had more than 1,200 horsemen in the Battle of 1460. This very same thing is also true for his opponent, Vlad the Impaler. Another factor that further reduces the number of victims is the highly fluid and shifting political loyalties of those times. This inherent flexibility became particularly evident in the conflicts between the numerous different rivals for the throne, when the boyars had to quickly position themselves on the side of one or another of them, and avoid fights that were too heavy and long, which ground down the military forces, the boyar bands, representing the largest part of the country's army, and not the peasants from the plow, as we have otherwise been accustomed to by the remarkable films of Sergiu Nicolaescu. Often battles probably didn't even take place with the boyars making the decision as to who should win this conflict. Vlad undertook around 15 raids, larger or smaller. He fought in 4 internal conflicts that were not small at all, led 8 larger battles in various campaigns, and conquered the throne by force 3 times. According to a relatively cautious and modest estimate made using conservative methods, the entirety of these violent clashes could have resulted in a total of 7,800 victims. Among these were about 3,000, representing 40%, who were peasants or other inhabitants of small unfortified towns. Of the 7,800, no more than approximately half must have been Ottomans, killed, however, in a much shorter period of time. Of these, about 2/3 were part of highly militarized local communities. Here we must point out a confusion that even some historians still make. Not all Ottomans were Muslim Turks. Therefore, probably the majority of the Impaler's victims in the Great Danube incursion in the winter of 1462 were Bulgarians and Christian Vlachs. They served as voiniks or dervenchis, thereby strengthening the Ottoman military position in the surrounding region. We learn this from the Ottoman census records. From our professional perspective, operating under the direct or indirect strategic military leadership and command of the Impaler, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 people would have died, which is less than 1/3 of the smallest number reported by our sources, and only 4% of the largest number. Unlike the legendary Mircea the Elder, John Hunyadi, and the renowned Stephen the Great, Vlad the Impaler never actually fought a major battle against an army led by the Sultan himself. Consequently, his battles resulted in no more than a few hundred deaths in a single day. Mircea fought, as you know, at Rovine and at Nicopolis against Sultan Bayezid the Thunderbolt. Yes, the Thunderbolt and not the lightning. Iancu at Varna, Kosovo Polje and Belgrade, and Stephen the Great at Valea Alba against Sultan Mehmed II, but also in numerous other major battles, such as those at Vaslui, Baia, or the Cosmin Forest. In just a single brutal battle among those listed on this record, many thousands of brave soldiers died, which effectively means that in the span of a single day, these powerful rulers killed just as many enemy soldiers as one could possibly imagine, as the Impaler did in all his campaigns combined. Therefore, Vlad could not possibly have been remotely close to the most notorious and deadliest Romanian ruler of the entire Middle Ages historical period. We, however, are dying of impatience to, just like His Highness used to end his Slavonic letters, extend our wishes to you from all our hearts, and may God rejoice over you. Goodbye.